Okay, so it's 12:58, but I have some introductions and housekeeping stuff to do, so I'll start with that, and then I'll turn the floor over to Joanna. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is the first session in our five-part series of developing your research as a graduate student. Before I get into that, I'll start with the land acknowledgement for Athabasca University. Athabasca University respectfully acknowledges that we are on and work on the traditional lands of the Indigenous people, Inuit, First Nations, and Métis of Canada. We honor the ancestry, heritage, and gifts of the Indigenous people, and we give thanks to them. Feel free to throw your land acknowledgement in the chat box if you would like to. So as I said, my name is Crystal Zahara, and I am the coordinator of academic records and graduate thesis here in the Faculty of Graduate Studies. And joining us today is Joanna Nemeth, and Joanna is a managing librarian here at Athabasca University. And Joanna is going to give this presentation today on searching like a pro in graduate school. So again, this is part of a five-part series. The next session that we are offering is next week on the 1st of October, and that session is Keeping Organized as You Search, so really important session. I will throw the link in the chat box so you can register for that one next. Just so everyone is aware, this is being recorded, and then afterwards the recording will be available in the chat box for you to go back and review. There is no access to mics and cameras today. We have a lot of people joining from all over the place, so just to kind of keep things flowing, we will just have those muted for the time being. But when there is time for comments, please feel free to raise your hand and I will give you access to your camera and mic, or you can always use the chat box. So with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Joanna. Thank you very much, Joanna.
All right, thanks so much, Crystal. So I'll just add in a couple things about questions. Feel free to post your questions in the chat throughout the session. If they're not super applicable to what we're talking about or are going to take us too far off topic, I'll wait and answer them at the end. So feel free to just copy them back out at the end, but we'll have time for questions at the end. So Crystal's already introduced me. My role basically covers all the public service work at the library and overseeing all of that, but it also means that I answer most of the research questions. So if you're working on a specific research project, I'm usually the librarian that you'll get for help with that. All right, so by the end of this session, you'll be able to apply the most appropriate search strategy in a variety of search tools, develop effective search strategies for a variety of search tools, and create a search strategy for your own research question. So a basic roadmap of what we'll be talking about today. I will note that this session is not going to go over the basics of using the library. I know we have students from Memorial here as well, but for students from AU, we just did 2 sessions over the last 2 weeks that are just orientations to using AU Library. So I'll add those to the chat. They're just recorded on YouTube. I will also post this on YouTube once we're finished with it, but I will blur out everyone's names and photos and all of that, so it should be anonymous. All right. So our roadmap for this session. So we're going to start by going over some keyword brainstorming and getting some ideas going. Then we'll get into how to connect those together using our Boolean operators. Then we'll talk about the more advanced features of developing your search string, which are truncations, wildcards, proximity, and subject headings. Then we'll actually develop a search and try it out in a database. We'll look at the cited by section of articles and where you can search for those. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. All right, so I'm going to start using this RISE course, and I will share the link in the chat. This is nice because you can go back and follow along or do any of the activities later on, or when you need more detail or anything like that. All right, so the first thing to note is that the search process is non-linear. It's going to be iterative. You're going to go in with some ideas, do some searching, learn more, and then kind of start again with the ideas and learning more. So it is quite a time-consuming process. So what you're going to want to do is start by mapping out what you know about your topic, and then identify the key concepts. So what you'll want to start asking yourself is, what do I need to know about this topic to proceed? What are the main ideas I want to know more about? Are there population, geographic, time, etc. criteria for my topic? What are the best or most appropriate keywords for my topic? All right. So every time I do this session, I put up a new photo, and then we've got a fun word cloud we can do here. So to give you an idea of what this looks like, this is just kind of to give you an idea of like when a professor gives everyone the same question, even if you're all working on the same research question, you can go in so many different directions. So this is what the one from last year looked like. It was a photo of like what I would call like a farmer's market. And you can see how people went in so many different directions. Like we have market as the most common term, but then we've got herbs and spices, women working, street vendors, open air markets. You can see how there's so many different areas you can go into just with one photo. So we've got this photo of some dogs running in a field, and would love for you guys to just add in some terms that you think of when you look at this. So I'm adding a link in the chat there. If you don't want to open multiple windows, you can also, I think it's like directly underneath here. If you don't want to, you can just also add terms into the chat and I can add them in for you. Everything's been quite slow on campus today. Okay. Okay, here we go with that. So you can see we've got dogs, field, grass, and 2 people have posted that already. We've got rescue dogs, dog, just singular, off leash, the ecological impact maybe that dogs have in the environment, field, don't need to focus on dogs. All right, I'll add the ones from the chat in as well. We've got dogs, nature, outdoors. Oh, I like that someone added peace in. So you can also like think about this as a broader perspective of like how you feel while you're there. Freedom. Pack mentality is a good one too. Pack is another good one. Outdoors. Awesome. Fun. Fun and running. Great topics as well. Exercise. Yoga. I like that. Really going outside the box. Okay, so that's just kind of to give you an idea of how you can brainstorm and come up with topics as you start looking at your search. So good job everyone for that. So the next thing we're going to look at is we're going to take a look at this research question. So what effect does online learning have on the mental health of youth? So while we're thinking of the brainstorming keywords, this is where I want to get into our brainstorming keywords. So our major topics are going to be online learning, mental health, and youth. Sometimes students like to add effect in, and I find that that's not usually necessary because by searching these 3 key concepts, you're going to be looking at the relationship between those things, so usually effect isn't necessary to have in there. So our next order of business for our next activity is to come up with some actual keywords for these search terms, and then we'll use this as our search throughout our session. So I'm just adding a link in here. What this looks like is a whiteboard, and I'll kind of show you how it works. Okay, so I used to use Google Jamboard, but they're getting rid of it. So I've been trying out this one because it's one of the few ones you don't need an account for, which is really good. So I've got our 3 topics here, online learning, mental health, and youth. So the general idea is you can go over here to text, add heading, and then we could do like wellness, say. For youth, we might do young adult. And you can just slide it over there. And what I'm going to do while you're writing these in is just add as many as I can while you're going into our search string, and then we can use that later on and as we're continuing on with our session today. And once again, if you're having issues or don't want to open multiple windows, feel free to just add them into the chat and I can add them as well. So it's just the text over here. You just click text and then you can just do add heading and go from there. and just slide them over. Unfortunately, they all seem to come up in the same place. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but we got to test out different technologies when we can. Technology for online learning. Awesome. I will add that one in. Okay, peer reviewed. Yeah, it's too bad they all come up in the same place. The last session I did, I think we only had 20 students at, so it was a little less chaotic. Asynchronous learning, good one. LMS, that's a good one too. Virtual learning, good one. We've got teenager, adolescent. Distance learning, that's a good one too. Self-guided learning, nice. Independent education, that's a good one too. Oh, and well-being, another good one. I was trying out some searches yesterday using this, and I found that using the hyphen in well-being did not work as well as using well-being as one word, so good job there. And I think social relationships is a good one to consider as well, because that is usually an indicator of mental health. Oh, and webinars, I like that, getting into the specific ones. Emotions is a good one too. Okay, and isolation, I think that's another really good way to, we've got depression and isolation. Those are also indicators of mental health on the opposite spectrum. Community connection too. Okay, and I'm going to add child in. That's another good one. You can always, like, while you're deciding on your topic, add child, and then if you decide you might want to go older or younger, always a good way to go about doing that. Students is a good one too. Dysregulation's really good too. Seeing all of these come up. Oh yeah, and MOOC is a good one too. Oh, mentorship is an interesting one to add in. And anxiety. Mental safety is an interesting one too. I haven't heard of that one. And procrastination is good too. And learners, yeah, that's one we do not have yet. I actually used this question last time I ran a session, and you guys are coming up with a lot more terms than the last group, so good job, everyone. Pat on the back. So it's a little chaotic. You can see there's lots going on in here, but that's also kind of how starting out your search should be, is just like coming up with as many related things as you can, coming up with all the words you can and trying to figure it out, and then from there focusing in on your specific topics. As you're searching, you might decide that procrastination isn't actually what you're wanting results about, or that that wellness is bringing up. I remember that was a really popular term maybe like 10, 20 years ago. So kind of like seeing those differentiations in date ranges as well. Okay, so great job, everyone. I've got a bunch down, and we'll continue on with our topic. So I added a bunch of those into the chat, or into the search, and then what we're going to talk about next is how we can connect all of these terms together. So these are kind of some simple examples of much more simple than what we just developed search strings. But this first question is on whether people are more likely to stay in their jobs if they have access to professional development. So you can see they came up with the main topics being engagement, participation, which would be like staying in your job. Sorry, which would be if they're going into professional development, opposite of staying in your job. So engagement or participation in professional development or training or staff development and retention. So our main topics are engagement, professional development, and retention. Now, of course, there's many more terms we could use here, but this is just kind of to give you an idea of what it looks like. So our related terms are going to have ors in between them. I'll go over this with some visuals as we continue on, but just to give you an idea of kind of what these search strings look like. And then our ands are going to connect our not synonymous terms together. So this is kind of what this is what the search string would look like in one of the databases. So this is a much simpler version of the question we just asked, which was mental health of youth in online learning. So you can see we've got youth or adolescent and online learning or e-learning or distance learning. Obviously, there's about a million more terms we can use for distance learning, and as we're all at a distance learning institution, I'm sure we all have many thoughts on that. And then we've got mental health over here, and of course we could do like or wellness or well-being or depression. So this is kind of how the search process usually goes. You're going to start out by casually sleuthing. So I get a lot of students who come to me and they're like, I need to write a paper on ancient Rome. And that's great, but they're not going to be able to write a whole paper on ancient Rome. They're going to have to pick something within ancient Rome. So that's where you might not know much about ancient Rome to start out with. So the first thing you're going to do is just Google, do some Wikipedia searching. We have dictionaries and encyclopedias, all libraries do, like online ones you can use that we have subscriptions to, just to kind of get an idea of what information there is about your topics. You might not know much about it starting out, or you might not have a focused enough area to go into. So you're not going to be citing anything from Google or Wikipedia. It's just kind of to give you an idea of what's out there, what terms might be used, what you might be interested in. And then as you find out more, you're going to decide on a direction or a focus area for your research. Once your course is set, you can go into the library and start out just doing some searches. It's a lot of trial and error, so review the results and see if they're relevant, modify, use new keywords you might come up with as you're searching, and continue on. And you're just going to keep revising and repeating. If you get stuck, you can check out the different subject guides and database recommendations, and keep searching. Try different databases, try different terms, try reworking the search in different ways. And obviously, if you're stuck, you can contact us, the librarians, and we'll be happy to try getting you more on point. Okay, so now we'll get into our connectors. So I talked a little bit about these Boolean operators, which are and, or, and not. So I like to start by talking about our ors. So these are all of our related concepts. So if we go back to our very messy whiteboard here, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so we can see it well. Okay, so if we were to use our ors, we would use ors between all of these words. So we would say online learning or remote learning, or technology for online learning, or LMS. See if I can copy this. Then we would do mental health, or procrastination, or overwhelm, or well-being, or wellness. And then we would do the same with youth. We'd say youth, or preteen, or adolescent, or child, or young adult. So the idea of ORs is that you're searching everything about all of these topics. So if we look here, Piaget and the theory of cognitive development, or we'll say or the theory of cognitive development or constructivism, what this search is doing is it's searching everything about Piaget, also everything about Piaget and cognitive development, you can see this middle ground, and everything about constructivism and Piaget and theory of cognitive development right in here. So it's searching everything that's green, getting everything about all three of these words. So it's really going to broaden your search. So you're going to be using those with your synonymous terms. So we've got examples here like pediatric or child, vaccination or immunization, city or urban, deer or ungulate. So you can kind of get the idea there. Our ands are going to be to connect our different terms together, and it's going to make our search smaller. It's going to limit our search. So ors will broaden and will limit. So in this case, we're searching for youth and e-learning and motivation, somewhat related to our search topic we're working on. So you can see the idea here is that it's only going to search for articles that are about all three of these topics. So it's only going to search for articles about youth, motivation, and e-learning. It's not going to search for articles that are just about e-learning and youth, this funny little triangle here, and it's not going to search for articles just about e-learning. So if we go back to our search, our ands will go between these. So we've got our online learning keywords that all have or between them. Then we have and then we have all of our mental health terms. And then we have all of our young adult youth terms here. So the last Boolean operator is not. So not needs to be used a little bit cautiously. So the idea of not is if you are searching for something and you keep getting something that really isn't related to your topic, you can use not. But if we look at the example here, we're looking for social cognitive theory and advocacy. If we say not, and we keep getting articles about marketing. So if we say not marketing, fine, we're going to skip out on all the articles about marketing. But the problem is that social cognitive theory and advocacy, quite a bit of that has to do with marketing. So you can see here there would be this whole triangle that would be about social cognitive theory and advocacy that we're going to miss out on because we said not marketing. So you always want to be cautious with that because it can be easy to kind of like lazily use not because you just want to find articles on your topic and then you end up like leaving out a bunch of stuff. So examples of times that it's good to use not is here. If you're doing research on rape culture and you keep getting articles about canola, that might be because rape seeds cultivars are also called rape cultures, which would be for canola. So not super useful. Another example I like to give for all the parents out there is in healthcare, we have the PEPA framework, and we get lots of if we're doing research on that, you might get articles about Peppa the pig. So you could say not pig in that case, because it's very unlikely that you're going to get articles that are about Peppa the pig and the healthcare model or about pigs at all and the health model. So that's another easy example for that. So I didn't give you examples of ands, but a couple ideas for ands would be like scoliosis and children. You can see how these are not synonyms. These are different concepts that you want to find articles that are about both of these. Alberta and food insecure, rural and education, that type of thing. So I know these can be kind of hard to get your head around. So as you're searching, it'll become a little bit easier, and that's why you'll see it's why I like to have all the searches on different lines with our ands connecting them. It just is a little bit easier to wrap your brain around. But we do have a little activity here. So I'm just going to read out these terms and you can write in the chat either and or, and we'll just test and make sure you guys are getting it. And it's totally fine if you get it wrong. It's just to kind of make sure you kind of know what's going on. So pet therapy, would that be and or? Okay, we've got a few ands, and that is correct. How about death coping? Got a few more ands there. Good job. How about dog canine? Okay, a lot of ors coming in. Good job. How about homeless, housing insecure? Okay, that is an or. I'm seeing quite a few ors. Now I'm seeing a few ands. So homeless and housing insecure typically would be used somewhat interchangeably. Obviously, there's politics around when to use them and which ones are appropriate, but in the purposes of our search here. Now, arts confidence. Okay, I'm seeing some ands come in. Now, university post-secondary. Okay, quite a few ors. Good job. And wetlands, species at risk. Okay, that's one I always get wrong. I always think that they're going to be ors, but indeed it is an and. Cure, treatment. Okay, got the ors coming in. Good job. That's a good one to note for our nursing and psychology students. And diet, nutrition. Yes, those would be ors. Nutrition, hospital. Okay, that is indeed an and. Good job, everyone. So now I think we'll continue on and try out our search in a database. See if I still have this loaded. My computer's been really slow today, so I tried to preload, but indeed it timed out. Okay, so this is just a basic search from our main search box for everyone at Memorial or different universities. I think most universities have a one search box or a Discover search at the start of on your main homepage. It's just kind of an interdisciplinary place you can do a basic search, and I find it's a really useful way to just kind of get started with your search. See how things look. Okay, so in the first box, oh shoot, you know what we're going to do first is go over our truncations, wildcards, and proximities so that we can make our search a little bit stronger. So truncations account for a variety of suffixes. So you can see the idea here is like advocate with a truncation. We're going to get advocate, advocates, advocating, advocacy. So everything surrounding advocacy. Great, super useful. Likewise with communicate, you can see communication, communicating. Child, that's another really good one. Although depending on your search, childlike might not be super useful. Then we get into construct with a truncation at the end. It's going to search for all the varieties. So as you can see here, we're going to get articles about constructivism and constructionism. Those are pretty related, so that's fine. But we might also get articles about construction. And that could be either like building materials, or it could be, you know, construction of a theory or something like that. So you do want to be really cautious about how far to the end of the root of the word you put something. You put your truncation. So it can just be good to be cautious there. And yeah, like I was thinking, I did a search for cyber trolls. So I had troll with an asterisk at the end, and I was getting articles about trolls, the mystical variety, Anthony Trollope, trolleys, a lot of varieties of stuff. So you do want to think about where your terms are coming from and how many different terms you're going to get from something. I will also note that you will always want to use quotations around phrases. So anytime you have two words together and you want those terms to be searched together, you want to have quotations around those terms. So next we have our wildcards. I'm going to note that we're going to use EBSCO for our practice, and so these are using EBSCO. Truncations tend to be similar across databases, but wildcards tend to be different in different databases. So as you're developing your search, it can be good to check the help section of any other database, and every help section will have a list of the wildcards used in their database. So an asterisk in the middle of our word is going to search for multiple characters. So in this case, you can see we're using HEAD and an asterisk and ONE. That's going to search for headstone, hearthstone, somewhat related, but it's also going to search for headphone, may or may not be related. If we look at the hashtag, this searches for one optional character, so that's really useful for these Latin spellings where you might want to search for pediatric or pediatric with the AE. It can also be useful for the Canadian spellings of things where we might have an OU or just a U if we're going with the American spelling. And then the question mark matches one character. So if you can see women here, we can search for women plural, women singular, and women with a Y. I said quotation marks for all phrase searching. So anytime you have two words together, you should quotation mark around it. And is it accurate that truncation does not work with quotation marks in phrase searching? No, that is not accurate. You can use quotation marks and truncation and wildcards all in the same search. Now, proximity is another one that's quite interesting and can be really, really useful. So what proximity does is it searches words within a few words of each other. So this is kind of where the phrase searching comes in, because in this example, we're looking at incarcerated youth. So we could search incarcerated youth. That is probably a subject term we can use. But there's also probably going to be articles that have something like youth who are incarcerated. So that's two terms in between youth and incarceration. So that's where proximity can be really useful. You can also have multiple terms in both proximities. So you could have jail or prison, or if you want to get into like court cases, you could have court or incarceration. And then N5 is going to search within five words of the next terms, which would be our young adult terms. So I find the more I search, the more I end up using proximity, but it's a little bit of a tricky one to get your head around. And then for particularly our psychology and nursing students, there are very specific subject headings, especially in our subject-specific databases, particularly for those topics. They're each going to have a subject heading list at the top of their database, or sometimes it's called a thesaurus, depending. I think PsycInfo is a thesaurus and all the subject headings. And those are really, really useful to look at. So you can also watch this short video on mesh terms. And there's also specific mesh terms, that's medical subject headings, that are additional for your searching, so develops some more fun stuff for you. Okay, so now we'll go in and do our search. Okay, so I mostly added in truncations to this search, but I'm sure there's lots of areas we can continue to improve on. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we've got our young adult line with ORs connecting all of these terms, quotations where possible, and then truncations to allow for plurality. And we could even do teen. Then we'll get teen, teens, teenager, teenagers. Can't think of any other ones, but you never know, we might get something weird as well. Okay, then we'll do our online learning line here. So there's a lot in here. You can see I've got virtual learn, and I tried to use learn with a asterisk at the end as much as possible. That'll account for learners, learning, and just learn. And then we've got our mental health line here. So we've got procrastination, mental safety, anxiety, mentorship, dysregulation, all of these. Okay. And we'll just go ahead and do our search. And I'll point out a couple of things that are a little bit EBSCO specific, but are also relevant to most databases you're going to use. Okay, so over here, we might want to limit to scholarly journals. Capitalizing our Boolean operators. That's a really good question. Most of the time it doesn't matter, but it's the best habit to get into to capitalize them, especially like as you're developing your higher level searches, because you do need them to be consistent across the databases, and because some databases require it, it's good to use capitalization, but for your Boolean operators, but not entirely necessary while you're working on your search. I would say like when you're doing a systematic review or your lit review or like putting in your search to submit to something, that's where you when you're going to get marked on it, capitalization for sure. And then if we were to limit to, say, the last 10 years, just so you get an idea of what this looks like. So these are just some limiters on the left here. And what I mostly wanted to show you, just to give you an idea of this, is if we go up here to search history, you can see that you get your searches. So next week we're talking about keeping organized as you search, and that's where we'll talk more about our search journals and how you can keep track of the searches. But for now, I just think it's important to note, as you're working on your searches, if you're finding good results, it's really good to just copy these out, put them in a document somewhere just so you can get back to it. I have enough students coming to me being like, I found some good articles. These were kind of the topics, and it's very hard to find again and replicate like exactly where your brain was at when you were coming up with these searches. This can also be helpful for going back, being like, oh, I kind of messed up. I want to go back to my last search. I will note that these time out, so I wouldn't super rely on using these. But you can see we got our 3 searches, just our plain one, then we added our peer review limiter, and then we added our publication dates. So that's useful, but if your computer times out, if you go for lunch, if you lose internet, it'll go away. And yes, you can, this is always a good question, you can log in here and create an account with EBSCO to save your searches. I'm not a super fan of that just because as you're working through graduate research, you're going to use more than just EBSCO, and it can be kind of confusing to figure out which accounts you have and which searches you have where. So that's where using citation management software is really good, and we have a session on that, I think in 2 weeks, that will cover how you can keep all of that in one place a little bit easier. But yes, you can create an account with EBSCO. That's just between you and EBSCO, so if you have problems with it. What I don't like about it is if you forget to sign in and then you save it all, it's not where you want it to be. The same goes for adding things to your folder. Those will time out. I actually had a question about it today. Another important thing to note is that this is a non-reusable search or hyperlink. So if you want to get back to this specific page, you can go over here to share and select the permalink. Now we'll actually go into an article. And this is the other area I wanted to point out. So we've got here, you can see we've got major subjects and minor subjects. Those are just how large of a topic it is, basically. But those can give you really good ideas of how to further develop your search. So you might notice as you're looking, they're like, oh, curriculum would be a really good addition to my search, or maybe that's exactly what I'm looking for. So those can be really useful. You'll also notice in the abstract that we've got our specific terms, like we've got
key role in supporting.
I always accidentally press listen and it starts reading it out to me. We've got mental health and all that stuff in there. So our next, that can be really useful if you're noticing that one of your topics doesn't seem to be coming up in the articles. Over here on your drop-down select a field option, you could be like, okay, I really want to focus on mental health. I want to make sure mental health is mentioned within all the abstracts of the articles coming up. So that's kind of just a quick overview of what your searching looks like and a couple of ways you can further limit. The other thing I'll point out is our geography limiters. This is always a question we get. So down here you'll see this is actually just which articles have, how many of the results have a specific geography subsect listed. So you can see there's 412 from Canada. So it's quite useful for being able to see what articles specifically selected Canada. And if it updates, I can show you. If we click on one of these, down here you'll see in this section, it'll say geographic terms and it gives the specifics. The important thing to note is that not all articles have a geographic term listed, and that doesn't mean they're not about Canada. So the other thing, there's kind of 2 ways you can do your Canada searching is that, or you can go Canada. I'm going to do the truncation at the end, so it searches Canadian, Canadians. So we had 412 when we limited to our geographic term. And then if we add Canada to the abstract sakes, then we're going to make sure that those articles talk about Canada in the abstract. Then you can see we have 805, so a bit more. They might be less specific to Canada, but it's a good way to look at it. Okay. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about was cited by. So when you're trying to figure out how important an article is, if it's foundational, if it's been used much, to try and figure out if you want to use it for your paper, there's three main databases that do this. I believe I was at a presentation on ProQuest and they were going to be adding it soon, but don't quote me on that. So you can see in Google Scholar, keep in mind that this is only listing the number of articles that are indexed within Google Scholar. So Google Scholar is going to have the most, but that doesn't mean it's not cited in other places. So in this case, this article from 2017 is cited 12 times. This one is quite a bit older, but it's also cited a lot more times. You also want to take a look at what the results are looking like, what they're talking about within this article, because they might also be disproving the theory. So always good to check that. Web of Science is another one. And you can see they're going to have less because it's smaller than Google Scholar, but you can see we've got 7 citations here and 2 here, and then you can click on them and look through the articles. Quite useful. And then Scopus is the other big one that does that. Okay, so lastly, I've got time for questions and I'll just add in this as our final activity. You can just add in what you need to find for your research. So I'm adding in our Padlet link here and you can just go to the add button and then write in, or you can if you're also looking for peer-reviewed sources, or if maybe your assignment says peer-reviewed journals and you're not sure what the difference is, add that in too. And yeah, feel free to throw questions in the chat, or as Crystal said, she can unmute you too. Oh, good question about gray literature. Okay, so I'm just going to pull up one of our guides on gray literature. One of my colleagues made this really useful guide, particularly used in nursing. But I would say it's most popular in the health sciences, but you're seeing more and more. So gray literature is basically anything that isn't from a controlled commercial publishing. So it's a lot harder to find. So that can include conference proceedings, dissertations, government documents, newsletters, policy statements. This is also where you get into the government document aspect, preprints and unpublished research, clinical trial data, all of that kind of stuff. So this page, I'll add a link in the chat, goes through some really useful stuff on how to track as you're doing gray literature searches and how to develop a really strong gray literature search. And it gets into advanced Google searching, where you can start to limit to the specific organizations you're searching for and the topics you're looking for within those. So it can be really, really useful. Now, can you please explain the difference between databases and collections? Maybe things like EBSCO and others that are like EBSCO. Okay, I am going to recommend that you take a look at, my colleague just did some sessions on this last week, but I'll also give you a little overview. I'm just going to add some links. So we did 2 orientations. She did 2 orientation sessions on more of that stuff, and she loves explaining those. So I'll add those in. So basically, when you take a look at, this is our library homepage, but it's going to be the same within different libraries. So our main search is this discovery search, and it's an EBSCO search, so it's created by the vendor EBSCO, and it searches our catalog as well as a lot of databases that we have access to. So if we were just to do a search for mental health, what you can see here is that we're getting some ebooks. Those are part of our collection or our library catalog. So those are things we actually own. So if you were looking for books, this includes DVDs, but of course it's going to be most prominently books. Over here on the left, you can limit to our catalog, and that will be our actual collection, whereas the idea of these searches is that they're going to bring up everything on the topic, so not always everything that we have subscriptions to. And basically what it does is it links to subscriptions where it can. In this case, this is an EBSCO. This is hosted in EBSCO, so it goes directly there. Sometimes it'll link to a different database, basically where it can. Not all vendors get along super well, so they're not always able to link directly. So the idea is that for advanced searching, particularly for grad students and higher level researchers, you need to be able to see everything that's been published on a topic, not just what the library has access to. So I get that question a lot from undergrads because they're like, well, I just want my 5 articles that have to do with my topic. In that case, you can use the full text limiter, and that will limit out to exactly the articles that are directly, articles and books that are directly linked in EBSCO. But we have much more information. I'll just show you. So that's just EBSCO. Over here, we have a direct link to ProQuest, and what that does is it inputs your search from Discover into ProQuest. ProQuest indexes totally different results. Usually they're not linked at all with EBSCO, so it's another really good, just like quick interdisciplinary starting search. And you can find all the databases here. So it's often useful to start with ProQuest and EBSCO and then take a look through the other databases that might be most relevant to your topic. Why would you need to see how often an article has been cited by others? You don't necessarily need to. It's just as you get into more advanced searching, it can be useful to see how prominent an article is, if it's a foundational text in the topic. That's kind of the idea of like where it sits within the scholarship. Good question. Collection catalog. You know, I'm not a collections librarian or a cataloging librarian, so I'm not sure I can answer that, but typically the catalog is everything we own. And I think the library collection is used a little bit more broadly, but I'll have to report back to you on that one. Yeah, like I would say the collection is the catalog, but I'm not certain. Okay, do we do a session on gray literature? We don't. I do it in most of the orientations I do for grad cohorts, but if you're not in a cohort that has an orientation, I would just contact the library. I usually like just go over it briefly, so really all of the information is in here, but we can also help you come up with some searches and that type of thing, and it might be something, if it's wanted, we can definitely think about doing one on that too. Okay, not sure if I missed any questions there, but it looks like I got most of them. I think I have a question slide at the end here too. Okay, but I think we're at about time, so if you have any more
Awesome.
questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead,
Thank,
Crystal.
thank you so much, Joanna. I just wanted to say thank you again. And yeah, so just like I had mentioned before, I'm going to throw the link to register for the next session in the chat here before we close out. And I just wanted to thank you, Joanna, for today, and thanks for all of the questions. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Awesome. Thanks so much for hosting this, Crystal. Crystal will post the link to our specific session. I'll also just say the right site has a really good page with all of the upcoming webinars, and all of these research series are listed in there as well, so I just added that link. And yeah, feel free to contact the library if you just email library@athabascau.ca with any of your follow-up questions or any specific research questions. We can help you there, and it'll all get directed to me. And awesome. I find that just listening to someone talk about how to develop your search string is a lot harder than actually trying it out and trying to come up with terms and seeing if you're getting things right. So I'm sure there's always, like, once you start doing your own search, you'll come up with additional problems and confusions, but that is also where our RISE course can come in handy. So I'll add a link to that once again in the chat. There's one thing that's not loading correctly, and I've been bugging IT about it, but everything else is working and up to date. The recording will be available at the bottom of this chat once we close out of it, but I'll also download it and put it up onto our YouTube channel, and I will grab a link to our YouTube channel as well. All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. And thanks, Crystal, for hosting it.